You guys want to see that. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the October meeting for Rochester Xamarin. Today's October 9th, and before we get started with any of our meetings, I always like to thank our sponsors. The .NET Foundation provides our Meetup account, and my company, File and Q, is sponsoring this, our GoToMeeting tool, so we can make this available online for anyone in the world to join. And our community has been growing. We got people that aren't just here in New York. We got people all over that dial in to watch what we have to present here. Community announcements. Not so much on the code stuff this month, but just a couple things that I've been keeping track on. The service event happened last week, which was super cool. If you missed it, my 2-second highlight for you is dual screen devices are coming. They're really cool. They're going to be running a light version of Windows and Android, depending on the size of the device, which is exciting, which opens up a whole mess of problems for us as developers. So the next year is going to be really, really exciting in the mobile development space. Xamarin, Uno, and any of the .NET platforms along with that. So I'm really excited for what's to come in the future. But I do have a couple links. Before I forget, Chris, you mentioned to me about the Code Camp in Boston. I threw that up here. Could you send me the link in chat so I can pull it up real quick?
Absolutely.
And we'll get to that in just a minute. We'll go through the rest of my list first. So I'm going out of order here, but it can't be a Rochester Xamarin meetup without me highlighting a release of Xamarin. So 7 days ago, 4.3.0 pre-release 3 was released for people to get their hands on. Don't quote me on this, but last I heard, collection view and carousel view are going to be full feature in 4.3 or very, very close. So there's a lot of work that's being done on those, and they're getting closer and closer to moving them from experimental mode to ready to go in production. So that's really exciting. I've been using those features along with my projects, and it'll be nice to not have to constantly modify them as they update them. So that's super, super exciting. At the service event last week, we had some of the dual screen devices running Windows and Android. They also showcased something called Windows X, which is a new light version, dual screen first Windows operating system that's going to be on their tablet version called the Neo. So I haven't really looked too much into it, but I wanted to share a little bit about it for people to, if they haven't heard about it, start looking at it, because that's, we're all here to learn about mobile development, and that's going to be stuff we're going to need to be able to integrate with as Microsoft rolls out these devices. I'll share all these links in the chat once we get through the announcements. And if you're watching the YouTube video later, they'll be there as well. Uno platform, if you haven't heard of it, I've been really excited about it, and this kind of piggybacks off the Microsoft event. They unveiled the 2 new devices. On the left you have the Neo running Windows 10X, and on the right you have the Duo, which is a smaller one running Android OS. And Uno platform had this really great blog about it that I wanted to share, and it's all about, where do they have it? Neo plus Duo equals Uno, which I thought was kind of cool. Uno allows you to use WinUI, UWP to write your mobile apps or whatever, and it will work on Android, iOS, WebAssembly. So it's, with these 2 different devices running 2 different operating systems, the first thing that jumped out at me was, this is a problem. We have different operating systems. How are we going to be able to write apps for them? And I really think Uno is going to be able to answer a lot of those problems. So there's a lot of really cool development on that. And since I'm mentioning it, I will bring up that, because I get asked, I was in one of the Slack communities I'm in, I got asked all these questions today about, well, what is Uno? Should I learn Uno or Xamarin? And Uno builds upon Xamarin native, so they're not fighting each other. They working. They're going to be working together at the end of the day. So something that I'm hoping to get some people in here to present about in the future. But enough about Uno. Moving right along, it is October. It's Hacktoberfest. So people are all around the world are doing pull requests, trying to get their free T-shirt for, but more importantly, helping different open source projects. And David from Xamarin made this blog post about what pull request to the Xamarin project will get you. And one pull request is going to get you a sticker. 4 is going to get you a T-shirt. 10 is going to get you a really cool glass trophy. And they had some rules here. They're looking for something more than just fixing typos. So read the blog, check it out, get and get more involved with contributing to Xamarin. A lot of people on the Xamarin team are available on Twitter if you have trouble contributing or don't know how to get started. If you really don't know who to talk to, get a hold of me and I'll get you in touch with somebody. Hopping back to slide deck. Oh, Chris, did you send the link in chat?
Yes, I did.
All right, let me pull that up. And you're talking at this event, right?
I am talking at both. There's the Boston Code Camp, which is at the end of November, and the Granite State Code Camp in New Hampshire on November 2nd.
Okay. So if you're anywhere in the East Coast, Boston's not terribly far to get to. For those here in Rochester, I think it's like an 8-hour drive. If you're a little bit further east, it might be shorter. But our speaker today will be going there to talk about it. Code camps are always fun events to make it out to. All right, thanks for sharing that. All right. And before we get into announcements, if anyone wants to hang around afterwards, last month we talked about doing a little social time after the presentation. So feel free to hang around. I'll keep the GoToMeeting going for a little bit for if anyone wants to chat. And today we have Chris Miller talking with us about Xamarin Shell and getting started, introduction to it. Chris Miller is a Microsoft MVP, a Pluralsight author, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of other things, but he mentioned that to me right before the meeting, and I wanted to mention those two things. So I've been looking forward to this talk all month, or since he reached out to me about presenting, which was a couple months ago. So without anything further, Chris, I will make you presenter. Thanks for coming to present, and you can take it away.
All right, let's get the screen up. And do we see my screen?
Yes, we do.
All right, cool. Welcome to Xamarin.Forms Shell. And let's make sure I get the right mouse. All right, who am I? Well, I'm a software architect for Tyler Technologies working in Albany, New York. We do school-bus transportation software. You can find me at Twitter on Another Lab. My blog is at rogerpet.com. I'm on GitHub, LinkedIn, Stack Overflow, all the usual places. I've been a Microsoft MVP for 7 years in developer technologies, and I'm also now a Pluralsight author. And Tyler Technologies is hiring. We do software and services for the public sector. We have offices across North America. About 5,000 employees, a quarter of which are dev. We made Forbes Best Employers for Diversity list last year, or actually this year. And we've grown every quarter since 2010. We are profitable, and it's a good company to work for. If you're interested or you know someone's looking for a job, we have all sorts of positions open. You can go to tylertech.com/careers. And if you have any questions, please email me at chris.miller@tylertech.com, and I can answer any question you have or direct you to whoever you need to talk to. And a bit of plug for myself. I am an author. I did a book on cross-platform localization with native apps for Xamarin. I also did a Pluralsight course on pretty much the same topic, except updated. It's a couple years newer. And I'm currently working on a course for Shell, which is going to be a superset of what we're going to be talking tonight. So our agenda for tonight, we're going to get some questions, talk about some functionality, and we'll do some demos. And I love the Avengers. So we have one question for you. Where is Shell? Oh, I'll give you one better. What is Shell? And we'll complete that out with, I'll give you one better. Why is Shell? So where is Shell? Shell was introduced in Xamarin.Forms 4.0. It was released in May of this year. The preview came back in December at Connect, and there's been regular updates since May. Xamarin does updates about every 6 weeks. Once a bug's been identified, it's usually stomped on for the next release. And when you have it installed, you have a template for it in Visual Studio. It's open source, as along with everything else with Xamarin, and lives in GitHub. So that's obvious. If you have any question, you find any bug, it's usually the first place to look is see if there are any issues raised, to see if someone else has had the same issue as you have. So what is Shell? Shell is a very easy way to declare fly-up menus and tab bars. If you've used the master detail template, Shell requires a lot less code to get up and running. As mentioned, it was introduced in Xamarin.Forms 4. It defines the navigation layout and hierarchy, and makes it really easy. You can put everything in one place. It also gives you URI navigation. You can define routes to allow navigation to any page in any order, both forwards and backwards. It does not replace the hierarchical navigation that's the default for forms. It's just another way to get around. It also provides a search handler, and the UI for that is wired in for you. You only have to deal with writing the actual search code. So why Shell? It provides a simple way of defining the page navigation. Xamarin, they decided the master D template was not enough. I always found it very confusing when I would create a new project using master detail, figuring which one's master, which one's detail. And then you have to write the code to populate the flyout, and then write the code to load each page. It works well, but there's a fair amount of code that you have to implement first. Shell is also optimized for faster drawing. All the renderers now in Xamarin.Forms implement the fast renderer pattern. This simplifies the speeds and the drawing and speeds for the UI. Under the hood, the renderers are able to draw the controls with fewer elements than before. This was first introduced in Xamarin 2.4 about 2.5 years ago as a preview feature for buttons, images, and labels. It's now the default way of drawing the controls. It takes fewer passes for the rendering system to lay out a page with Shell, which means you get snappier performance, which is especially noticeable on Android. So let's jump in and do a couple demos. And let me pause this and then bring up Visual Studio. And oh, just a second. Visual Studio apparently is on the wrong screen. There we go. All right, so we're gonna quickly go through and just create a new. Come on, let's see. Close all. Yep. And we're just going to create a new Xamarin app, and we'll do it with master detail. And we'll just use the master detail template, and we'll just get up and running. Okay, we'll select the usual defaults. A little bit of a churn. And let's just run this so you can see what we got. Actually, let's make sure we get update the NuGets first. And let's just run this. Whoop. Go away. Will this be a little bit of compiling? For tonight's demo, we're going to be doing everything in Android. Everything usually works in iOS, but I made the misfortune of updating Visual Studio on my Mac earlier this afternoon, and now Visual Studio won't connect it until I update it. And the last thing I want to do is update Visual Studio just before presentation. That's tempting the demo gods.
Nothing ever goes wrong when you do that, right?
No. I've seen too many things crash and burn. All right. Here we go. Brief pause when it comes up. And what we're running is the standard master detail template out of the box that you get with Xamarin. So you get a very plain, flat, flyout menu. You select it. It's a little sluggish, but it does the work, does the job. And if we go under the hood, let's bring it up. And we'll bring up the main page. Listen big in that. So we have two sections. We have the master and we have the detail. Master is what the menu is. Detail is the pages that appear on there. So if we go into menu page, it's just a list view with some binding and is populated in the code behind. Not a lot of code, but it's still in the code behind. And let's go back to our main page. So on the detail page, that is in the code behind on the main page. And we have all this code that'll create and add pages on the fly. Nothing terribly difficult, but just a lot of code that you have to keep in sync with each other. So now let's just create a default shell project. Close this down, and we'll create a new project. Again, we'll select Xamarin. Okay, first thing you notice is UWP is grayed out. It's right now, I believe, in preview mode. Not preview mode, sorry. Preview release for UWP. That's been pretty much a community-led project, with the loudest person in that being Morten Nielsen. And eventually that'll probably be 4.3, I think is gonna be out. Just gonna be coming out soon. And we'll just do the same thing. Bring it up and update the NuGets. And select all. And we'll run it. The Xamarin team is updating Xamarin.Forms and Shell with releases every 6 weeks. So it's iterating at a faster rate than the Visual Studio updates typically come out with. So whenever you do whenever you create a new project using a template, literally the first thing you have to do is update the NuGets because they will not be current. And let's see. As we're compiling slowly but surely. Here we go. Okay, so now we see something very similar to the previous app. We have tab bars at the bottom that allow you to switch back and forth. We don't have a flyout menu, but this default template doesn't use that, but we can easily switch that in just a second. So let's go behind the scenes. So with Shell, all your page navigation is defined in what the default of shell app.xaml. So let's just go down here. So right here, these 8 lines of XAML define your layout. So we're saying we're using a tab bar with our title, our icon, and shell content with the content template. This line right here is what will launch the page. And we're using a data template, it'll create the page, it'll create it on demand. If we want this to be a flyout menu, that's pretty easy to change. Let me bring that up. So instead of using the tab bar, we'll use something called the flyout item. And when you use flyout items, you can't use a tab bar. They're mutually exclusive. So we'll just comment that out for now. So we're gonna have a flyout item, same title, same icon, same shell content. And now when we run it, as it comes up, instead of having the tab bar at the bottom, we now have a flyout menu, and it has already support for the icons. So these 6 lines of XAML replaced all the code that we were using master detail to populate the flyout menu, to do the handle selection, and all this and all the other good stuff. It does speed things up dramatically. So that right there is the basics of an introductory shell app. Now we can dive a little bit deeper. We'll go back to our presentation. So what makes up shell? Well, everything's inside a container called shell. You get a flyout menu, which is optional. You can either have the flyout menu or you can have the tab bar. When you use the flyout menu and the tab bar, you get top tabs, bottom tabs. Shell content is the code that actually handles placing your content in the display area. And you can also have menu items. So that will give you items in your flyout menu that don't correspond to a page to be loaded. Let's say you had some sort of like dialogue for calling another app or invoking like the ratings dialogue, for example. So here's a sample flyout menu from a different app. Divided up into 3 sections. Each section can be customized. So the section at the top is the header layout, and they call it the flyout header. You typically use it for branding and displaying information. You would use XAML to define the layout and the controls used. So here's a sample template. Here's a sample XAML for defining the flyout header. In this case, we're using a grid. There are 2 columns. And the first column, we're going to have an image. In the second column, we have some text. And we'll dive into this code a little bit later. But any valid XAML you can put in the header will work. This middle section is the item template. That controls the display of the items that represent the navigation pages. And there are bindable properties for icon and title. And you usually do this in XAML. So here's a sample template. Once again, we're using a grid. We're setting the column definition to be 20% and 80%. And then we're doing binding to a flyat icon. And then we have a label that will bind to the title. And basically, whatever image you want to put in, as long as it's bound to it, and now it gets defined when you define the flyat items. And the same for the text. You basically, it's a label. So whatever you do with data binding, you want to set the font attributes, you want to control the placing, set the font. It's just pure XAML. So here's a couple of samples. So we have a flight item, set the title, we set the icon, we send our content template, and then we can do that for a second page as well. Here's some sample XAML for doing top tabs. So we have a single flight item. It'll have the title and the icon, and then it will load in one page. I'll have tabs at the top, and each tab will select a different page. This is what you used to see a lot for Android, where all the tabs at the top, where iOS would have all the tabs in the bottom. Now it's all mixing and matching. So if you want to do bottom tabs, you have a flight item, and then you have a tab container. Inside that tab container, you'll have the shell. And then for each tab that you have underneath flight item, you'll have a tab at the bottom, which will have its own title and its own icon. And if you want to have tabs at the top and bottom, since everything's nested, you have your flight item, which will be have the title for the flyout, and then you'll have a tab, and inside the tab you can have multiple shell contents. So the way that will work is at the deepest level, that will be the tabs at the top, and the next level will be the tabs at the bottom. And then the last section would be the menu item, and that's defined very similar to the shell item template, except being Xamarin, they like changing the name of the binding properties. We bind to item instead of flight icon, and we bind to text. And other than that, it's all pretty vanilla. And then you can either use an on-click event, or you can do data binding. Now we'll talk a little bit about URI navigation. When you're using navigation, you register routes to each page, and you can chain the routes to form a navigation hierarchy. The URIs can have three components: the route path, the page, and then one or more query parameters. So right down here we have //route, /page, question mark, some param equals some value. So that means when you invoke this, you will be going to, from the base level page, you're going to select route and page, and some param will be passed in with some value. You can call this code can be, when you call a URI, you can call from any other place and immediately jump to it. So you don't have to back all the way down. Shell will handle all that for you. And then in the view, you define a property to receive that query parameter. We'll talk a little bit about search. The UI support for a search is built in. You don't have to worry about where that search bar is going to appear or any of that navigation, any of that UI interaction. That's all handled for you. You basically subclass the search handler class, and then you override the onQuery changed and on-item selected events. So we'll take a quick peek at that. So on query change, it gets past the value that the user typed. And then you would set the item source to an IEnumerable of T list of items that match the search criteria. And then on item selected, that will execute the page navigation for the selected item. So basically, as you're typing, you're doing the searching, and then Shell will give you a pop-up list, and when the user clicks on that list, it will call an item selected. So here's an example on query change event. It passes old value, new value. You really don't care about old value. We're only looking at new value. I like to just convert everything to lowercase to make the searching easier. Data store is just the data store that's in the sample app. And item source is whatever you filter back on the results. You can search on the data source that you're using for whatever the list is on that page, or it can be a separate data source as long as you get back the same type, because you're going to pass that to your detail page. So in this case, we're searching on a list of houses, and we're matching house type or address on whatever they type in. And an item selected, we set item source to null. Right now, there's a little bug in iOS with Xamarin Shell that we need to put a very short delay. Otherwise, your pop-up it just won't work. It just won't go to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to pass in a URI of, in this case, the house page on the house's route, and we're passing in the ID. And that will launch our, our house detail page. So to implement the search handler, there's a little bit of XAML. You add the search handle and to your page, and the shell handles the UI. So it's as simple as adding this section. You know, you get your namespace to your search handler, and then you just set placeholder. Show results equals true, so that will give you the equivalent of a drop-down list. And display member name will be the property of the collection that's being displayed in there. So how do you handle the query parameter? You use the query property attribute to bind the parameter to the view. And then you define a setter method to the parameter to load up an instance of the view model. So on our house detail page, all this is from some sample code we'll get to a little bit later. We add the query property attribute to say that the ID property is going to get past the ID value. And then we just have the setter. House is basically the view model that we want to find, the model that we want to find. So basically we're just saying unescape the data string and get item async, which is a method in the data store. And that's going to come back with an instance of that house model. We create a new instance of the view model and pass that in, set that to view model, and then off we go. The page will be constructed and it'll already have its view model set to the binding context. All right, so now we're gonna do another demo. Let's see which demo we want to bring in. Yeah. Sure, get the right demo. Yep. This demo is just going to show the different ways we can define the page navigation. Make sure I get the right one. Yep. So we started with the shell template that we had before, and which is the tab bar here. And what I'm going to do is comment this out. And then uncomment out this code. And let's see, we saved it. And now we just have a basic flyout menu. Now I'm going to add a flyout header. And it's basically just going to be just a little grid with a label. Wait for this to refresh. And we get some layouts. So basically anything you want to put in there will work. And let's see, let's scroll down a little bit. And so when you set flyout displayed items as to multiple items, it will do a little bit of grouping. So we'll see here is, you'll see a line here. But as soon as something appears below there, there'll be another line below that. And it gives you a very simple way to group related items. So to display bottom tabs, and to do top tabs. So once again, we have a single tab with multiple shell content inside of it. And that'll give us our top tabs. And then do bottom and top tabs. It's basically very similar to what we just had before, except now we have multiple tabs. And each one has multiple shell contents. So here's the first tab with the two top tabs. And then we go to here. And then if we want to add a menu, and now we just call the menu item. Boom. And that sums up the different navigation types. You can customize a little bit, but that's the basic way of doing it. Everything's in one file, which makes it really easy to manage. And there was nothing in the code behind. It's all done in the XAML markup. Yeah, let's go back. So when do you want to use shell? Well, it's great if you have the standard app layouts where you're doing either a flyout menu or you're doing tabs at the bottom, tabs at the top. If you're doing something a little different, it could be harder to fit into shell. Shell may not be the right thing to use. Also, it's good for new development. If you already have an app written and already has the navigation working, there's no sense reinventing the wheel if you don't have to. And you want to have the same general look and feel on iOS and Android. When you use the master detail template in Xamarin.Forms, you will get tabs in the bottom or tabs at the top, depending on which operating system, and it'll get a little confusing. This way, you can keep the same UI, you can keep the same flow on both. So that's the basics. So let's talk a little bit about adding some style to our app. So with styling, you can have customizable templates for the flyout header, the shell menu items, and the search results, which is real cool. That gives you different ways of setting up the icons. You want to do the colors. You want to you can customize the search layout, so it's displaying more than one field. You can write custom renderers. They have a nice rendering model. Where you typically see like it's fairly easy to write a custom renderer for the flat menu to use a gradient, so you can get some nice low coloring. The font icon support in 4.0 makes it really easy to add scalable icon images. I do a lot with material design icons. It makes it really easy to have one set of images for iOS and Android and not have to worry about the different sizes for each one, as long as you can find an icon that's the right size, the right style for what you're looking for. Two of the more common icon fonts are Material Design Icons and Font Awesome. And there's a separate NuGet package called Xamarin.Forms Visual Material. And what it does, it alters the iOS renderers to make them look more like Android. Like for example, out of the box with Material Design Android buttons, the labels are a little smaller and they're all uppercase. When you use Xamarin.Forms Visual Material on iOS, it makes the iOS buttons look like Android buttons. Little stuff like that. Shell is a work in progress. It is a moving target, and there's some things that you need to consider. The examples and documentation favor XAML. You can write code to populate everything in the code behind. They just haven't documented that well, so it can be a little tricky to figure it out. Styling is incomplete. There are styling attributes that you can set that won't work. For example, there is a styling property for setting the color for disabled items in shell. That flat doesn't work. And there are weird things that are just broken. Right now, the current public release is 4.2, and if you change the color of the navigation bar text, it doesn't change the color of the hamburger menu icon. The little weird things like that. It's sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step sideways. So if you're using Shell, it's important to get involved. They track everything very well. If you find a bug and can write a very simple use case, just post it in their GitHub and they'll take a look at it and address it. Actually, let's go back a second. We're gonna go into one more demo, which somehow I left off the slide. So yes, I want to stop debugging. Alrighty, let's fire this guy up. We're waiting for it to compile. As you can see right here, I am using the material font. So this is the app that basically is just a mock-up of a house listing app, and it has a couple of flight items, and the rest are just menu items to show. So we have house for sale, which is 2 tabs at the bottom, and we have our search. So this will let us search on address and also by house type. So if I type in C, we get all the houses that have C in the address, anywhere in the address. CR. And when I click that, it goes right to it. These images are all from material design font icon, and it's pretty cool to use. So what we do is there's a TrueType font, and you just add it as either an iOS resource or an Android resource. And then in your app.xaml, bring that in there. Open, I said. We use this code right here. We set a key called material font family. And iOS, it'll come back as material design icons. On Android, it'll come back with the full font name. And then in our code, we can reference it. Let's see, to app shell. And that's how we can set the font name. Now the glyph, we're using a strong typing name. So there is a website called Icon Font to Code. We've just upload your icon font and it will generate this code right here. Let's go up to the top. So we get a static class, and so we get a nice easy rename like numeric that'll correspond to this Unicode sequence, which makes it like if you want to use newspaper variant, why would you want to remember that? And also gives you IntelliSense in your XAML. So for the home button, we want to stop literally. Whoops. Very easy. And just about any image now in Xamarin.Forms can use a font image source. So you can set the color, you set the font family, set the glyph. It will set the size based on the height request, though you can override that and set that yourself. And then we do is, for our flight icons, we do the same thing here. We can set our glyphs. And the nice thing about this is you get a nice sharp, vector image for every single variation of Android, and for the three, the Retina, 2x Retina and 3x Retina for iPhone. And this makes it a lot easier to keep track of your files. Of course, the drawback is you need to have an icon font that has the image that you want. And if you want something that has multiple colors, it doesn't work either, because icon fonts are going to be a simple color. They're going to be a single color. And one does not simply end a presentation without answering questions. Does anyone have any questions?
No one has questions?
Yeah, Prism doesn't currently work with Shell. I know they're working on it. As far as I know, there are no MVM frameworks that currently support it. Part of the problem is that the documentation for creating Shell in code isn't out there. They're doing everything that I've seen for documentation is XAML based.
I might be able to add a little bit to that. I've been doing Xamarin Shell since it came out and using it with Prism. The view model locator kind of works. Navigation is a nightmare. If you are not an expert in Prism, I do not recommend going down that approach. But if you really like the dependency injection and the view model locator, you know the limitations before you go into it would be the thing that I would mention. The simple cases worked, but then when I had to do special stuff, I ran into nightmares. So beware.
Yeah, there be dragons.
I did have a question for you, Chris. So you mentioned in that you can't use the tabs with the flyout control.
You can't. No, you can use you can't use the tab bar control. You can have tabs on a flyout.
Okay.
So they have a separate control for no flyouts.
Because I was really confused by it, because in my project I have a tab bar defined, and then below that I have a flyout defined, and they both just seem to work, and I haven't really ran into problems with them not working.
Huh. It may be an ordering thing. Maybe I had issues early on.
And I could be doing something that's like a weird ordering thing, like you just said. I was just like, wait 1 second, but mine works.
Yeah, your mileage may vary and contents will. When you did that, were the tab bar items showing up on the flyout menu?
So when I open up a flyout menu, it pushes the page onto the stack,
Yeah.
so the tab bar goes away.
So how do you get back to it?
I wired up a back button.
There you
There
go.
be dragons.
There be dragons. Yep. Which is a cool thing. They did expose a lot of that functionality, so you could wire up anything you want to the back button. At the Xamarin Dev Summit, one of the guys working there, oh, I just forgot his name. I just know him by his handle, Pure Ween. He went through a long demo where he was Shane Nickerson, I think. He went through a very long demo where he basically wired up recovery from Tombstone events. So you could start the app and come right back up right where you left off, and use the URI navigation to immediately jump back to the page you're left at, even if the app wasn't even in memory at all, which was pretty cool. And one thing that I thought was a huge omission in Shell, there was no way to do like a header on the flyout menu. Not out of the box. So if you were grouping objects and you wanted some label in front of above them, actually I can bring up there is a way to do it. And since I spoke really fast, we have a lot of time. I can bring that right up.
You're talking about a header item above the menu item for each menu item?
No, if you're grouping, let's say you're grouping menu items.
Oh, I understand. Okay, so you got like 4 menu items and you want to have some type of text above that. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, my project, I only had one area of menu items, so I just used the header template to solve that, but that would
Yeah.
not work if you had multiple sections.
If I brought up the right app, let me just run this real quickly. Because it's actually fairly easy to do. Yep, I think this is it. Like that. If you want to get that kind of look and feel, where you have a couple items that are grouped, like very similar to what you would see with like the Amazon mobile app. So this is not clickable, but this is clickable.
Oh, that's cool. How'd you do it?
All right. Used a flyout. I used an item template selector.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yep. So what we do is we go into the flight item selector. So there are three type templates. There's a header template bottom, and an item template. So if the route starts with header, you're either going to use the top or the bottom. So if it has a title, we use the top one. If it has no title, we use bottom. Otherwise, we return the item template. So in our app shell, the way it will get defined, and so we have special offers, the route is header offers, and we have to set is enabled false. So that way when they click on it, nothing happens. And then we just have regular flyout items. And then at the bottom, I have a route called header offers with no title. And so our templates, let's see, where are they? So here's our flyout one, which is just a regular grid and label. I'm missing one. All right. So flyout header template, this is the top one. So we're gonna have a box view, they'll draw the line, and then we're gonna have a grid and set the font size to small. Then we have then we on the bottom, we're just we're using another box view to draw the bottom line. And that's all it does. And then obviously at the top we set item template to be the selector. And we just wire it up like that. And that way it's the only code involved is in the flyout item selector. There's nothing in our code behind it for the shell has to do anything. And the nice thing about that is I can have, like if I wanted to group the other ones, I could do, well, let's grab the other one. Go. If you want to be really clever, you could add a converter to force everything to uppercase, but this is quicker.
Oh, that's super cool. So when you open that up, though, is that search header like a clickable item? Will like
No.
the screen flash?
No, that's because what we were saying is enable defaults.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that still recognized the click event because like sometimes you have something on the screen that you
Yep.
don't want anyone to do. It still like flashes on Android.
And boom.
That's so cool. I love this.
You would think that they'd have that built into shell.
Yeah, but the plumbing's all there. I mean,
Yep.
they're still catching up on documentation. I mean, when I was up at Xamarin Saturday in Toronto, I was talking about stuff about customizing shell, and I think it was Shane reached out to me on Twitter and said, "Oh yeah, we're not documenting that stuff yet, but you found their tricks."
Yep.
There's a question in the chat. So you mentioned that this is going to be a more in-depth Pluralsight class. Do you have a date on when that's going to be out on Pluralsight?
They want it out the beginning of November, so hopefully
Oh,
beginning
that's
of
coming
November.
up.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's gonna go into basically everything we did here with some additional stuff like a custom renderer or two.
Cool. I'm getting some woohoos in the chat. People are excited. All right. Was there any other questions that I missed in the chat? Just double check. No? No? Everyone could go home and do this perfectly tomorrow with their teams?
Cool.
I'm going to take screen over. This is your last slide.
This is it.
All right. Where's my presenter? And this one, I think. All right. Chris, thanks for coming and doing the presentation.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I think you're the second New Yorker to do a presentation for Rochester Xamarin, so I'm excited about that.
Who was the first one?
Me. We're an online community, so people will present from all over, but it's exciting to get someone that's relatively local. Chris is you're in the Albany area, right?
Yeah. So about what,
So
four and a half hours?
it's about 3.5 hours from the greater Rochester area, so local-ish.
Localish.
Close enough. But last month we talked about doing a little bit of a social time at the end of our user groups, since we don't meet in person, and there's really no easy way for us to kind of meet, mingle, get to know people if you want to. So we said, let's try and keep this the go-to meeting going for however long. I could probably keep it going for like 10-15 minutes if people want to hang out and chat, ask Chris questions, ask me questions, or just chat about whatever. Our next meeting is going to be November 13th, same time, 6:30 p.m. Eastern time, and we're going to be talking about App Center. So I'll keep your eyes peeled on the meetup. I'll be hoping to make those announcements towards the end of the month. And that App Center is always a good topic in my opinion. I use it quite a bit. And
Yeah,
Chris, thanks again.
I've been using the things that you worked on with James for Azure DevOps
Oh,
for
those
managing the build numbers.
are you using the the plist transform that I wrote?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
works
that
really
one's
well. That is
I was
real
really
simple.
happy with how that came out, because I built that specifically for push notifications, because when you set up iOS, you have a development push notification
Yep.
server and a production one, and instead of writing something crazy to handle, I was like, well, I can just do tasks that does this, and I don't need to worry about managing any crazy code. But
Yeah, we're using it to update the build numbers.
nice. Oh, that's exciting. All right, let me stop the recording.